My name is Arthur, and I am 52 years old. My life is measured not in years, but in the patient turning of gears, the satisfying click of a well-set spring, and the deep, lustrous shine of hand-polished mahogany. My domain is the two-car garage attached to my parents' house, a space I long ago converted into a workshop. It is a sanctuary of focused silence, filled with the scent of machine oil, sawdust, and the faint, metallic tang of old brass. Here, surrounded by lathes, calipers, and tiny, meticulously organized drawers of custom-made parts, I breathe life back into the forgotten mechanical marvels of the past. I am a restorer of clocks, music boxes, and, my specialty, complex automatons. To my family, this intricate, delicate work is invisible. They don't see the artistry or the engineering. They see a middle-aged man who never quite grew up, a man who chose to play with rusty old junk, instead of pursuing a real career. In the carefully constructed narrative of our family, I am the quiet, dependable, and ultimately disappointing older brother. I am the gray background against which my younger brother, Mark, is meant to shine. Mark, at 45, is a star. He is a financial guru, a wealth management consultant with a corner office downtown, a tailored suit for every day of the week, and a smile as bright and blinding as a stock market ticker on a good day. He founded his own firm, Vanguard Capital, and projects an aura of effortless success. He is the golden child, the one who fulfilled all of my parents' ambitions. My father, a retired sales executive who worships at the altar of financial success, sees Mark as his own legacy perfected. My mother, who thrives on social status, speaks of my son, the investment banker, at her garden club meetings with a reverence usually reserved for saints. They have invested everything in him, not just their pride, but their entire life savings. They are his most significant clients. Their financial well-being is inextricably linked to the success of his firm, a fact that has begun to cast a long, dark shadow over our Sunday dinners. My own contributions to the family are of a more practical, and therefore invisible, nature. 15 years ago, when my father's own business failed, and they were on the verge of losing this house, I quietly took over the mortgage payments. I used the substantial, though hidden, income from my restoration work to save their home. They accepted my help, of course, but it was framed as my duty. As the live-in son, the fact that the deed to the house was transferred to my name was a legal formality they chose to conveniently forget. In their minds, I was still just the tenant in the garage. My work was my secret. In the niche, high-stakes world of horological and mechanical antique restoration, I was not Arthur, the quiet son. I was known only as the mechanist, a craftsman with a near-mythical reputation. Museums, auction houses, and the world's most elite collectors would seek me out through a discreet network of brokers. They would send me priceless, broken treasures, and I would return them, months or even years later, ticking, wearing, and singing as they had a century or two before. The fees for this work were astronomical, but I lived a simple life. The money was a tool, a means to acquire rarer pieces, better equipment, and, most importantly, the freedom to pursue my craft without interference. My family's complete and utter lack of interest in my work was the best security system I could have ever asked for. I want to take a moment here. Have you ever had a passion, a deep, intricate skill that you poured your heart into, only to have the people you love dismiss it as a silly game or a waste of time? It's a lonely feeling, isn't it? If this story is striking a chord with you, please take a second to hit that like button. It lets me know that these stories are finding a home. I would also be so grateful if you would comment below and tell me about your passion. Let's celebrate the junk that brings us joy. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and share this story. You never know who might need to be reminded that their quiet work has immense value. Now, let's get back to the workshop. The tension in the house had been escalating for months. The stock market had been volatile, and I could see the strain on my father's face. Mark's visits for Sunday dinner became less frequent, and when he did come, his usual easy charm was brittle, stretched thin over a foundation of raw panic. He was losing money, a lot of it, and since my parents' portfolio was his biggest account, he was losing their money. The breaking point came on a cold, drizzly Sunday in October. The dinner was a somber affair. My mother had cooked a roast, but no one had much of an appetite. Mark arrived late, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had been staring into an abyss. He didn't wait for dessert. He put his fork down, pushed his plate away, and looked at my father. "It's bad," he said, his voice hoarse. "The market correction. A few bad investments. I had a margin call on Friday. I need to cover it by the end of the month, or the firm is insolvent. They'll be ruined. We'll be ruined." "How bad is it?" my father asked, his voice trembling. "I need $1.2 million, Mark said. In cash, in 30 days. The number fell into the silence of the room like a tombstone. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. They were wiped out. Their golden child had flown too close to the sun, and his wings were melting. For a long moment, no one spoke. They sat in the wreckage of their shared financial dream. Then, 3 pairs of eyes slowly, inevitably, turned to me. I was the last asset left, the forgotten one, the one who didn't have a real job but was always, somehow, stable. "Arthur," my father began, his voice taking on a tone of grim, desperate authority. "We need to talk about the garage." I placed my knife and fork together on my plate. "What about it?" "That collection of junk you have in there," he said, the dismissive term a reflex even in his desperation. "Those old clocks and toys. They're antiques, right? They must be worth something. You need to sell them. All of them." "It's not just the junk, Dad," Mark chimed in, his voice gaining a sliver of hope. He was a drowning man, and he was pointing at me as his life raft. "The house. We need to sell the house. It's the only way. We can get a bridge loan against the value of the property to cover my position. And then sell it." They were talking about liquidating my entire existence. My life's work, my tools, my sanctuary, and my home. The home I had saved. They were proposing to burn my world to the ground to keep his afloat for a few more weeks. The scapegoat was being led to the altar for sacrifice. "The house is in my name, Mark," I said quietly. "Don't be difficult, Arthur," my father snapped, his fear making him aggressive. "We all know that's just a technicality. This is a family home, and this is a family crisis. Your brother's life, his entire future, is on the line. We have given you a home, a place to indulge your hobbies your entire adult life. We have never asked for anything in return. Now, we are asking. No, we are telling you. You will sell what you need to sell. You will sign the papers for the loan. You will do your duty to this family." My mother, her face streaked with tears, reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her touch was cold. "Please, Arthur," she pleaded. "Do it for your brother. Do it for me. He's your family. He's all we have," the final devastating line. "He's all we have." In that moment, I was not just invisible, I was nothing. I was a resource to be tapped, a problem to be solved, but not a son, not a person. I looked at their faces, a trinity of panic and entitlement. They weren't asking for my help. They were demanding my surrender. They saw my quiet life, my simple clothes, my oil-stained hands, and they saw a man with nothing to lose. They had no concept of the value of my work, the depth of my passion, or the strength of my position. Their underestimation of me was about to become their undoing. A strange calm settled over me. The hurt, the anger, the decades of quiet resentment. It all coalesced into a single, hard point of clarity. I thought of the project I had been working on in absolute secrecy for the past 2 years, the one hidden under a velvet cloth in the center of my workshop. The one that was due to be picked up in a few weeks. I gently pulled my hand from my mother's grasp. I looked my father in the eye. "You are asking me to liquidate my entire life's work and sell my home to cover your son's gambling losses," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "That is a significant request. I will need some time to consider the logistics." "There's nothing to consider," Mark insisted. "It's a simple choice." "Nevertheless," I said, my gaze unwavering. "You have given me a deadline of 30 days. I will give you my final answer in 3 weeks, on the 27th of the month, not before." I stood up from the table. "Now, if you'll excuse me. I have a very delicate piece of escapement to calibrate." I walked out of the dining room, leaving them in a state of agitated confusion. They thought my hesitation was a negotiating tactic, the weak protest of a man who would eventually fold. They had no idea that the 27th of the month was not a random date. It was the day the world was coming to my workshop, and I needed every single minute, until then, to make sure the star of the show was ready for her debut. The 3 weeks that followed were a slow, suffocating siege. The house, my home, became enemy territory. My family, believing my request for time was a sign of weakness, a prelude to an inevitable surrender, doubled down on their campaign of psychological warfare. They operated under the shared, unspoken assumption that the battle was already won. All that remained was to break my spirit. My mother took the path of emotional manipulation. She would leave old photo albums open on the coffee table, pointing to pictures of a young, smiling Mark. He was always such a go-getter, she'd say, her voice catching, so full of dreams. It would be a tragedy to see that light go out. She would cook my favorite meals, a peace offering laced with the poison of expectation, and then sigh dramatically when I ate in silence. I just don't know how this family will survive if we're torn apart. She'd whisper to no one in particular, but loud enough for me to hear from the next room. My father's approach was one of brutal pragmatism. He started bringing home real estate flyers, leaving them on the kitchen counter where I made my morning coffee. "Look at the comps in this neighborhood, Arthur," he'd say, his voice booming with false confidence. "We could list this place for 2 million, easy. That would solve all of Mark's problems and leave us with a nice nest egg." He spoke of "weh" and "oos," completely erasing the fact that the house was legally and morally mine. He was a general planning a campaign on a map that didn't belong to him. Mark was the worst. His desperation had curdled into a venomous entitlement. The charismatic guru was gone, replaced by a petulant, resentful child who saw me as the sole obstacle to his salvation. He would follow me to the door of my workshop, his voice a low, pleading whine. "Don't you get it, Arthur? This isn't just about me. It's about the family name. It's about Mom and Dad's retirement. Everything they worked for is on the line." When pleading failed, he turned to insults. "You're being selfish. You sit in there with your broken toys while the real world is burning down around us. What have you ever accomplished, really?" Through it all, I remained silent. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. My energy was not for them. It was for the masterpiece that was nearing completion on the central workbench of my shop, hidden from view under a heavy, dark blue velvet cloth. It was an automaton I called the Celestial Navigator. For 2 years, I had labored in secret to restore it. It was a piece from the late 18th century, a one-of-a-kind creation by a forgotten Swiss master. It depicted a seated astronomer, no larger than a child's doll, crafted from pure wood and ivory. He sat at a miniature mahogany desk inlaid with mother-of-pearl constellations. When activated by a complex series of brass gears and springs, the astronomer would dip his quill into a tiny silver inkwell, raise his head to gaze at a rotating, clockwork astrolabe of the heavens, and then, with breathtaking precision, chart the course of the planets onto a scrap of parchment. It was a mechanical poem about the universe, a perfect fusion of art and engineering. I had acquired it 2 years prior at a private auction, a broken, forgotten relic. Its owner had died, and his heirs thought it was just a strange, broken doll. I knew what it was. I had spent a fortune on it, and the last 24 months of my life had been a slow, patient conversation with its creator across the centuries, coaxing his genius back to life. The final piece of the puzzle, a microscopic ruby palette for the escapement that I had to craft by hand, was now in place. The navigator was whole again. He was ready. The family's siege reached its peak in the final week. My father, in an act of supreme arrogance, scheduled an appointment with a real estate agent to praise the property for a potential bridge loan. He informed me of this not as a request, but as a statement of fact. "The agent will be here at 10 on Tuesday, Arthur. Just make sure the place is tidy." On Tuesday morning, I was in my workshop when the doorbell rang. I heard my father's booming welcome, and then the clipped, professional tones of the agent. I continued my work, polishing the brass on the astrolabe. A few minutes later, the door to my workshop opened without a knock. My father stood there, flanked by Mark and a woman in a sharp business suit holding a tablet. "And this is the garage," my father announced, as if presenting a particularly troublesome part of the property. "As you can see, it's a bit cluttered. My older son has a hobby." The agent, a woman named Ms. Albright, peered into my sanctuary. Her eyes, sharp and appraising, swept over the lathes, the tool chests, the schematics pinned to the walls. She saw a mess. She saw clutter. She did not see the order, the logic, the lifetime of accumulated knowledge. "It would definitely need to be cleared out completely," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the high, sealant space. but it's a good, size 2, car garage. That adds value. A Mark, emboldened by her presence, stepped forward. My brother is just in the process of selling off all this junk, he said, forcing a charming smile. It should be empty within the week. I did not look up from my work. I continued to polish, my breathing slow and even. My refusal to engage, to acknowledge their intrusion, was a quiet act of defiance that infuriated them more than any shouting match could have. Well, Ms. Albright said, making a note on her tablet, assuming the space is cleared, and with a bit of fresh paint, I'd say you're looking at a valuation of around 2.1 million. Excellent, my father said, beaming. He had his number. He had his solution. As they turned to leave, Ms. Albright's professional gaze fell upon the velvet, draped object on my central workbench. What's that under there? She asked, her curiosity piqued. Oh, that's nothing, my father said quickly. Just the biggest piece of junk. The first thing to go. I finally stopped my polishing. I looked up, my eyes meeting Miss Albright's for the first time. That, I said, my voice quiet but clear, is a private commission. And it is not for sale. My father and Mark bristled at my tone, but Ms. Albright just gave a polite, professional nod and followed them out, her valuation complete. The door closed, leaving me once again in the silence of my workshop. The siege was almost over. The date was the 25th. 2 days to go. The final 2 days were a blur of quiet, intense preparation. I ran the final diagnostic sequence on the celestial navigator, watching as his tiny, perfect movements charted a silent, clockwork cosmos. I prepared a small portfolio of documents, the original bill of sale, the restoration logs, and the certificate of authenticity. On the morning of the 27th, I woke before dawn. The house was still and quiet. I dressed not in my usual work clothes, but in a simple, clean dress shirt and a pair of pressed trousers. I went to my workshop and gently, carefully, removed the velvet cloth from the celestial navigator, leaving him exposed in the soft morning light. His performance was scheduled for 10 a.m. At breakfast, the atmosphere was electric with a triumphant, predatory energy. My family believed this was the day of my surrender. Well, Arthur, my father said, folding his newspaper with a sense of finality. Today's the day. I have the loan application papers right here. After you've made your calls to sell your junk, we can go to the bank together. There will be no need for that, I said, sipping my coffee. A slow, smug smile spread across Mark's face. Oh, he said, don't tell me you've had a change of heart. Decided to finally join the family. In a way, I said. My answer is waiting in the workshop. At 10 o'clock sharp. Just then, a long black sedan, the kind that speaks of quiet, serious money, pulled up to the curb outside our house. It was far too early for a taxi. My mother peered out the window. Who on earth is that? I believe, I said, placing my coffee cup in the sink. That would be my 10 o'clock appointment. They're a bit early. I walked to the front door, leaving them staring after me. A flicker of confusion beginning to disrupt their certainty. They thought they were the only players in this game. They had no idea that the real audience, the one that mattered, had just arrived. I opened the front door to a man who seemed to have stepped out of another era. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a meticulously trimmed beard, and eyes that sparkled with an intense, scholarly curiosity. He wore a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches and carried a vintage leather briefcase. He was flanked by 2 younger people, a man and a woman, both dressed in the discreet, professional attire of museum archivists. Mr. Blackwood, the man asked, his voice a rich, warm baritone that seemed to carry the weight of history. I am Dr. Alistair Finch. It is an immense pleasure to finally meet you in person. The pleasure is all mine, Doctor, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, the hand of a man who was as comfortable with books as he was with the world. Please, come in. I believe you know the way to the workshop. As I led them through the house, my family, who had gathered in the hallway, stared in stunned silence. This was not the real estate agent. This was not a potential buyer for their son's salvation. This was an unknown variable, and it made them deeply uneasy. My father, recovering first, stepped forward, puffing out his chest in an attempt to reclaim control of the situation. Good morning, he boomed, extending a hand to Dr. Finch. Richard Blackwood, head of the household. I don't believe we were expecting you. Are you here about the collection? He used the word with a hint of sarcasm, as if sharing a private joke with a fellow man of the world. Dr. Finch shook his hand politely, his eyes glancing briefly at my father before returning to me. Indeed, I am here for the collection. A landmark day. Mark, seeing an opportunity, stepped forward with his dazzling smile, the one he used on potential investors. Mark Blackwood, he said smoothly. My father and I handle the financial side of things. Perhaps we could discuss the valuation you have in mind before you see the items. Dr. Finch's polite smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at Mark as a historian might look at a poorly made replica. Young man, he said, his voice losing some of its warmth, I believe you are under a misapprehension. I am not a dealer. I am the chief curator of horology and mechanical arts for the Smithsonian Institution. We are not here to negotiate a purchase. We are here to execute an acquisition and a transfer of title. Your brother has been gracious enough to allow us to announce it today. The words, Smithsonian Institution, landed in the hallway with the force of a physical explosion. My mother gasped. My father's face went slack, his jaw hanging open. Mark's perfect smile dissolved, replaced by a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. The Smithsonian, my father stammered. Indeed, Dr. Finch said, his attention now fully back on me. Shall we, Arthur? The team is eager to finally lay eyes on the celestial navigator. I led the way to the workshop, my family trailing behind us like ghosts at a funeral. They were no longer in control. They were spectators in a story they didn't even know they were a part of. When Dr. Finch and his team stepped into my workshop, they did not see clutter. They saw a sacred space. Their eyes swept over the tools, the schematics, the half-finished projects, not with disdain, but with a deep, professional reverence. The two archivists began to murmur to each other in low, excited tones, pointing out a rare 19th century clockmaker's lathe and a complete set of Swiss escapement files. But their attention, and my family's, was drawn to the center of the room, where the celestial navigator sat on his mahogany desk, gleaming under the workshop lights. Dr. Finch approached it with the slow, deliberate steps of a man entering a holy place. He circled it once, his eyes taking in every detail. He did not touch it. He simply looked, his expression a mixture of awe and profound academic joy. My God, Arthur, he breathed, his voice filled with emotion. The photographs did not do it justice. They could not. The patina on the brass, the grain of the pearwood, it's a masterpiece. A lost treasure, returned to the world. He turned to his archivists. Begin the documentation. Full photographic series, macro shots of the escapement, and the inlay work. I want every detail captured before we begin the crating process. My family stood huddled in the doorway, watching this scene unfold as if it were in a foreign language. I don't understand. My mother whispered to my father. What is that thing? Dr. Finch overheard her. He turned, and for the first time, he addressed them directly, not as family, but as a lay audience in need of a lecture. Madam, he said, his voice taking on the tone of a professor, what you are looking at is arguably the most significant piece of 18th century automata to be discovered in the last 100 years. It is the only known work of a genius named Philip Dubois, a watchmaker who was a rival to the great jacket draws. We thought all of his work was lost during the French Revolution. Your son did not just restore a toy. He has resurrected a piece of history. He has filled a missing chapter in the story of human ingenuity. He gestured around the workshop. This entire collection. The clocks, the music boxes, each one is a museum-quality piece. Your son is not a hobbyist. He is one of the 3 best restorers of complex mechanical art in the world. The other 2 are in Geneva and Kyoto. To have him here, in this country, it is a national treasure. Mark, his face pale, finally found his voice. So, it's worth a lot of money then. The question was crude, naked in its greed. Dr. Finch looked at him with a flash of pure disdain. Worth. Young man, you cannot put a price on something like this. Its cultural and historical value is incalculable. He paused, then added, a sharp, cutting edge to his voice. However, for the purposes of our acquisition agreement, and the federal insurance bond required for its transport to Washington, D.C., the collection has been appraised. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave a slight nod. Dr. Finch turned back to my family. The total appraised value of the contents of this workshop, including the celestial navigator, is $37,500,000. The number did not compute. It was too large, too abstract. My father simply shook his head, a low, guttural sound of denial escaping his lips. My mother began to sway and had to lean against the doorframe for support. Mark just stared, his face a canvas of dawning horror. He was a numbers guy. He understood this number. He understood that the junk he had ordered me to sell to save his $1.2 million failure was worth more than 30 times his debt. He understood that he had been trying to bail out a sinking canoe by demanding the sacrifice of a battleship. And that's not all, Dr. Finch continued, clearly enjoying this moment of revelation. As part of this historic acquisition, Arthur has made an endowment to the museum, a gift to the nation, to fund a new center for the study and preservation of mechanical arts. The Arthur Blackwood Center will train the next generation of craftsmen and ensure that these skills are not lost to time. He beamed at me. Your father and I were just discussing legacy. Arthur, this is a legacy that will endure for centuries. I let the words hang in the air, a final, damning indictment of their entire value system. The golden child had bankrupted them. The scapegoat was endowing the Smithsonian. I walked over to my father, who was still staring blankly at the celestial navigator. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the loan application papers he had given me that morning. I tore them in half, and then in half again, and let the pieces fall to the floor. There will be no loan, I said, my voice quiet but final. And there will be no sale. A flicker of insane, desperate hope lit up in Mark's eyes. So, you'll help me? Arthur, please. A small loan, just a fraction of all this? No, Mark, I said, turning to face him. I will not give you a single cent. This family has made its investment. You were their high-risk, high-reward venture, and you have failed. The portfolio is wiped out. My work, my home. This is my portfolio. And it is not open to new investors. I looked at my parents. You gave me an ultimatum. Sell my work and my home, or get out. You were right about one thing. It is time for me to leave. No, Arthur, wait, my mother cried, lunging forward. You can't leave. This is your home. Is it? I asked, my voice gentle but unyielding. For 15 years, I have paid the mortgage on this house. I have maintained it. I have saved it from foreclosure, all while being treated as a tenant in my own home. You are right, a decision needs to be made about the property. I turned to my father. You wanted to sell the house to save Mark. You had an appraisal done. $2.1 million. It seems a fair price. What are you saying? He whispered. I am saying that I am selling the house, I replied. To the museum. They have been looking for a property to house a residency program for the new center, a place where visiting scholars and craftsmen can stay. This house, with its history, is perfect. The sale is already being finalized. My agent is handling it. I looked at the three of them, huddled together, their faces a mixture of shock, terror, and utter devastation. You gave me 30 days to get my things and leave, I said. I am giving you the same courtesy. You have 1 month to vacate the premises. I believe that is more than generous. I turned my back on them and walked over to Dr. Finch, who was watching the scene with a look of quiet, scholarly detachment. Doctor, I said, shall we activate him? I believe it's time for his first performance in over 200 years. Dr. Finch's face lit up with the pure, unadulterated joy of a child on Christmas morning. Oh, Arthur, he said, his voice filled with wonder, I would be honored. I picked up the small, ornate brass key. As my family watched in stunned silence, I wound the mechanism of the celestial navigator. There was a soft whirring, a series of delicate clicks, and then, with a grace that defied mechanics, the little astronomer lifted his head, gazed at his clockwork heavens, and began to chart the stars. My new life began that day. I moved to Washington, D.C. to oversee the creation of the center. I have a beautiful apartment in Georgetown and a magnificent, state-of-the-art workshop on the museum grounds. I am surrounded by people who share my passion, who understand the language of my hands. I teach, I restore, and I create. I am no longer invisible. I never saw my family again. I heard through a distant cousin that they moved into a small, rented condominium. Mark's firm collapsed, and he was facing a mountain of lawsuits from his other clients. My parents' golden years were not golden at all. They were spent in the quiet, bitter reality of their own making. The system they had built, a system that required a hero and a villain, had crumbled when the villain refused to play his part and walked off the stage. I do not feel anger. I do not feel a need for revenge. I only feel a quiet sense of peace. My legacy is not one of bitterness. It is one of beauty, of history, of creation. It is in the steady tick of a restored clock, in the joyful song of a music box, and in the silent, perfect dance of a little man charting the stars. I saved these beautiful things from being lost to time. And in the end, they saved me too. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. It is a reminder that the things we build in silence, the passions we pursue that others may not understand, often hold the most profound value. If my journey has resonated with you, please show your support by hitting the like button and share it with anyone who might need to be reminded that their quiet work matters. I would be honored to hear from you. Comment below and tell me about the junk in your life that is actually a treasure. What is the passion that you are preserving? And if you want to hear more stories about the quiet victories and the patient pursuit of mastery, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There are always more wonders waiting to be restored.